By November 2027, Lake Mead will sit at 1,032 feet above sea level, lower than the record-breaking crash of 2022, lower than any end-of-month reading in the entire recorded history of this reservoir. A lake that has existed since the 1930s, and we are now heading toward the lowest point it has ever touched. That number landed the same week Las Vegas recorded 90 degrees Fahrenheit. In March, the same week snowpack data came in at 59% of normal across the Colorado River Basin. The same week federal scientists described inflow conditions as extremely poor. Everything arrived at once, and every single piece of it pointed the same direction, down. Lake Mead supplies water to 40 million people across 7 states: Nevada, Arizona, California, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. It powers cities through the turbines of Hoover Dam. It waters the farms that stock grocery shelves across the entire country. It is the largest reservoir in the United States, and right now it sits at 34% full. The scientists tracking it are not using careful diplomatic language anymore. Utah State University professor Jack Schmidt called it plainly. The river, he said, is on the brink of crisis. That word brink is worth stopping on, because brink does not mean somewhere down the road. Brink means the edge is right there. And the data coming out of March 2026 says the edge is closer than it has ever been. The question sitting over every water manager, every farmer, and every city planner in the Southwest right now is the same. How much time is actually left? Lake Mead holds 26 million acre-feet of water at full capacity. 1 acre-foot is roughly 326,000 gallons. Enough to keep 2 average American households running for an entire year. Today, the lake holds 8.8 million acre-feet. Do that math, and the lake is carrying about a third of what it was built to hold. A reservoir, engineered to store 9 full years of Colorado River flow, now holds closer to 2. The surface elevation tells the same story. Full pool sits at 1,221 feet above sea level. The lake today sits at 1,064 feet. That gap between where the water is and where it should be is 157 feet. Stand at the canyon edge and look at the walls. A white mineral stain runs along both sides from one end of the lake to the other, chalk white against dark canyon rock. That stain marks every foot of water that pulled away over the last 2 decades. It rises higher than a 15-story building. On a clear day, you can see it from the Las Vegas Strip. Researchers studying satellite images can see it from space. It has been growing for over 20 years, and it is still growing. The Bureau of Reclamation's latest projections put the lake at 1,032 feet by November 2027. That number sits below the record low of 1,041 feet set in August 2022, which was itself the lowest reading since the lake was first filled in the 1930s. The worst-case scenario, published alongside the official forecast, puts the lake at 1,025 feet. That is 130 feet above Deadpool. Deadpool sits at 895 feet. Below that elevation, water physically cannot flow through Hoover Dam on its own. The direction of travel right now is straight toward it. Lake Powell sits about 300 miles upstream on the Utah-Arizona border. It feeds Lake Mead. Federal projections now show Lake Powell dropping to minimum hydropower level by December 2026. The point where the turbines generating electricity for over 1 million homes stop spinning. 2 of the largest man-made lakes in America, both in freefall. At the same time, every year Lake Mead refills from one source: snow. Winter snow falls across the Rocky Mountains. Spring warmth melts it. Meltwater runs into rivers. Rivers carry it into Lake Powell and eventually down into Lake Mead. That cycle has driven this system for as long as the dam has stood. And in 2026, that cycle is breaking down at every single stage. Snowpack across the Colorado River Basin currently sits at 59% of normal. Last year it was 80%. The year before showed recovery. Water managers were cautiously optimistic heading into this winter. That optimism is gone. The Colorado Basin River Forecasting Center released inflow projections for April through July 2026. The number they published was 1/3 of normal. Not a slow year, not a below average year. 1/3. 2/3 of the water this lake depends on every spring simply is not coming. The ground adds another layer to the problem. Years of drought leave soil bone dry. Dry soil absorbs water instead of releasing it into rivers. Snow melts across the basin, and the parched earth drinks it before it ever reaches a river channel. The snowpack was already weak going into spring. The dry ground guarantees even less of it reaches the lake. Scientists measuring this describe it as a compounding effect. Each dry year makes the next dry year worse. The basin gets harder to recover with every season that passes. Then there is the heat. Las Vegas hit 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the middle of March. That is not a heat wave. That is a calendar shift. Spring is arriving weeks earlier than it used to. Snow that does fall is melting faster than rivers can carry it. A slow, steady snowmelt over weeks fills river channels gradually and pushes water all the way to the lake. A fast, warm melt floods briefly and evaporates or soaks into the ground before reaching anything useful. The West just recorded its warmest winter since temperature records began in 1895. The snowpack was already at 59% of normal before that heat arrived. Most coverage of Lake Mead uses one word to describe what is happening: drought. That word carries something inside it, an assumption that this ends. That rain returns, snow returns, the lake recovers, and life goes back to normal. Climate scientists have largely stopped using that word for the Colorado River Basin. The term they use now is long-term aridification. Aridification means the region is becoming structurally drier. The baseline itself is shifting. What used to be an unusually dry year is becoming the new average. The Colorado River Basin has 20% less water today than it did in the year 2000. That is not a temporary dip caused by a bad stretch of winters. That is 25 years of a river carrying less and less water with each passing decade. Researchers at UCLA studied tree ring records stretching back more than 1,000 years to understand how unusual this is. What they found is that the dry period gripping the Southwest right now is the worst in at least 1,200 years. To find a comparable stretch of sustained dryness, you have to go back to the 800s, before the founding of Oxford University, before the Magna Carta existed, before the Norman conquest of England, and the projections forward are harder to absorb than the history. Scientists modelling the Colorado River system estimate flow could drop by another 31% by 2050. The 20% loss that already happened, the loss that drove the lake down 157 feet over 25 years, may be followed by a further 31% reduction on top of it. These are peer-reviewed projections from hydrologists and climate researchers. The river is carrying less water. The long-term trend is clear. And 40 million people have arranged their entire water supply around a system that was built for a river that no longer exists at the size it was promised to be. Jack Schmidt said the river is on the brink of crisis. That same week, the Bureau of Reclamation revised its forecast downward. That same week, snowpack came in at 59% of normal. That same week, Las Vegas hit 90 degrees in March. All of it in the same window. All of it pointing the same direction. And Lake Mead sitting at 34% full, with the worst inflow season in recorded satellite history arriving this spring. The white ring on those canyon walls keeps climbing, and the number at the bottom of all of this stays the same. 895, the number that changes everything. Hoover Dam sits in Black Canyon on the Nevada-Arizona border. Drive out from Las Vegas on Highway 93 and look down into that canyon today. The first thing you notice is not the dam. It is the walls, pale white mineral stains cutting across dark volcanic rock on both sides, a scar left behind by decades of dropping water. That mark is still there, still growing, and the dam sitting at the bottom of that canyon is running at a fraction of the power it was built to produce. The dam finished construction in 1935, 2 years ahead of schedule, 726 feet tall, 660 feet thick at the base. 5,000 workers built it in round-the-clock shifts through canyon summers, where the heat hit 120 degrees Fahrenheit. 96 workers died during construction. Men lined up in their thousands during the Great Depression for a job on that site. It was the largest concrete structure on Earth when it was finished. And it was designed around one core principle: water pressure. The higher the lake behind it, the harder the water hits the turbines at the base, the more electricity comes out. At full pull, Hoover Dam generates roughly 2,080 megawatts. Enough electricity for 1.3 million homes across Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California. For decades, that output was steady and cheap. a foundation of the Southwest power grid. Then the lake started dropping. Every foot of lost elevation cuts the pressure driving those turbines. By the time the lake hit its record low in 2022, output had already fallen by 25 to 40%. Engineers installed emergency low-water turbines, smaller backup units built to work with less pressure. A dam, designed to be one of the most productive power plants in the western United States, was running on contingency equipment just to stay operational. The lake is now projected to drop lower than 2022. The backup equipment that kept the dam running last time will face even less water pressure this time around. And below 895 feet, the elevation called Dead Pool, water stops moving through the dam entirely. No pressure, no turbine spin, no electricity, no water supply. Las Vegas pulls 90% of its drinking water from this lake. The city spent $1.4 billion drilling a third intake tunnel through solid rock beneath the lake bed, 3 miles long. Finished in 2015, just to guarantee water kept flowing when the original intakes ran too close to the surface. By 2022, that tunnel was the only reason taps in a city of 2.2 million people still worked. The lake is heading lower than it was when that tunnel saved the city. In November 1922, representatives from 7 states met at a lodge in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Herbert Hoover ran the meeting, Secretary of Commerce at the time, years before the presidency, years before the dam carrying his name broke ground. The purpose was straightforward: divide the Colorado River among the states that depended on it. Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming sat at the table. They looked at the flow records available to them and agreed to split 16.5 million acre-feet per year. 7.5 million to the upper basin states, 7.5 million to the lower basin states. Another 1.5 million later committed to Mexico by treaty in 1944. The flow records they used came from an unusually wet period. The late 1800s and early 1900s produced some of the heaviest Colorado River flows in centuries. A rare cluster of high water years that made the river appear larger and more reliable than it actually was. They measured a historical anomaly and wrote it into law as a permanent baseline. The real long-term average of the Colorado River, tracked across more than 1,000 years of tree ring research, sits at 12 to 13 million acre-feet. Some years the river carries less than 10. The compact divided up 16.5 million. The math was wrong from the moment the ink dried. Some scientists raised concerns at the time. They noted the measurement window looked unusually generous. They suggested the numbers being used were too high. The push to close the deal was stronger than the caution. 7 states had agreed on something historic, and nobody wanted to reopen negotiations with smaller figures on the table. So they signed it. They celebrated it. They built cities, farms, power plants, pipelines, and entire economies on top of a calculation that has been compounding in the wrong direction for 104 years. Every single year since 1922, the states have been drawing from a river that was never as large as the contract assumed. For decades, the gap was covered by storage. Lake Mead and Lake Powell held enough banked water from the early flush years to absorb the annual shortfall. Think of it as a savings account, built up during good years and slowly drawn down during every year that followed. That account is now nearly empty. And once a savings account hits zero, every shortfall shows up immediately with nothing left to absorb it. Brenda Berman runs the Central Arizona Project, the canal system that carries Colorado River water 336 miles across open desert to reach central and southern Arizona. One of the most expensive water infrastructure projects ever constructed in American history. She said recently what most water managers have been thinking, but few have said publicly. The Colorado River Compact may be breached in 2026, and almost certainly will be breached in 2027. And that statement deserves a full stop. The compact has governed water distribution across the Southwest for over 100 years. It has survived droughts, legal battles, political fights between states, and decades of overuse. It has never been breached. Until now, it has always been met. Breaching the compact means the upper basin states deliver less water downstream than the 1922 agreement legally requires. Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico fall short of their delivery obligations to Arizona, Nevada, California, and Mexico. Legal claims go unmet. International treaty obligations go unmet. And the lawyers waiting on the sidelines of these negotiations move to center stage. Water policy researchers tracking the situation describe it in direct terms. The hydrology may force the issue before any political agreement does. Nature may pull the trigger that 7 state governments have spent years avoiding. The federal government set a deadline of November 2025 for the states to agree on new operating guidelines. The current rules expire at the end of 2026. The November deadline passed with no agreement. A second federal target of February 14, 2026 came and went the same way. 7 states, 1 river, 2 missed deadlines, and the clock running down on the framework that has kept this system functioning since 2007. Mexico sits at the end of this chain, holding a treaty right to 1.5 million acre-feet per year under an agreement signed between 2 countries in 1944. That obligation does not disappear because 7 American states cannot reach a deal among themselves. The Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon over 6 million years, a canyon a mile deep and 277 miles long. That same river for most of the last 25 years dries up in the Sonoran Desert before it reaches the sea. The river mouth that once covered nearly 2 million acres of wetland, home to jaguars, cottonwood forests and native fishing communities, is now cracked mud and salt flats. A river strong enough to carve that canyon cannot complete its own journey to the ocean. That one fact captures the distance between what this river was built on paper to deliver and what it actually carries today. Step back from the dam, the reservoirs, the legal agreements, and the power output numbers. Step back from all of it and look at what this river actually feeds. The Imperial Valley in Southern California sits in the Sonoran Desert just above the Mexican border. It receives almost no rainfall. Colorado River water irrigates roughly 700,000 acres of farmland there. And that farmland produces approximately 2/3 of all winter vegetables consumed across the United States. The lettuce on plates in January, the broccoli in February, the carrots and spinach in March, grown in desert dirt, kept alive by a river that federal projections now show dropping to historic lows within the next 18 months. Water cuts to the Imperial Valley do not stay in California. They move east through the supply chain and land on grocery shelves in Ohio, Georgia, Maine, and every state between them. Empty produce sections in winter, higher prices on the vegetables that remain. A water crisis in the desert Southwest becomes a food cost crisis in every American city. The two things feel completely disconnected until the shelves are bare in January and the price of lettuce doubles in a city that has never heard of the Colorado River. Arizona already lived a version of this in 2022. Pinal County, about an hour south of Phoenix, lost water almost immediately when the federal government declared a shortage. Fields that had grown cotton, alfalfa and grain for generations went dry within a season. Hundreds of acres of cracked brown earth photographed from the air where green crops stood the year before. Farming families who worked the same land across multiple generations watched their water rights become documents the river could no longer honour. The Ak-Chin Indian community, a tribal nation that spent decades in courtrooms and congressional hearings fighting to secure their water rights, had those rights cut in a shortage. They played no part in creating a broken promise sitting on top of a very long history of broken promises.